Good morning, Year 6. So I'm back again today, continuing on with Kensuke's Kingdom, and we will be reading chapter 4, Gibbons and Ghosts. So if you remember yesterday, we left off, Stella Artois had been barking, and then she went over the side of the boat. But it wasn't just her that went over the side this time. Michael went over with her. So we've left him in the cold of the sea, in the middle of the night, his parents asleep, no one around, and he is, well, in danger. Let's see what happens next. Chapter 4, Gibbons and Ghosts. The terrors came fast, one upon another. The lights of the Peggy Sue went away into the dark of the night, leaving me alone in the ocean, alone with the certainty that they were already too far away, that my cries for help could not possibly be heard. I thought then of the sharks cruising the black water beneath me, scenting me, already searching me out, homing in on me, and I knew there could be no hope. I would be eaten alive. Either that, or I would drown slowly. Nothing could save me. I trod water, frantically searching the impenetrable darkness about me for something, anything to swim towards. There was nothing. Then a sudden glimpse of white in the sea, the breaking of a wave perhaps, but there were no waves. Stella, it had to be. I was so thankful, so relieved not to be all alone. I called out and swam towards her. She would keep bobbing away from me, vanishing, reappearing, then vanishing again. She'd seemed so near, but it took several minutes of hard swimming before I came close enough to reach out and touch her. Only then did I realise my mistake. Stella's head was mostly black. This was white. So what do you think it is if it's not Stella? It was my football. I grabbed it and clung on, feeling the unexpected and wonderful buoyancy of it. I held on, treading water and calling for Stella. There was no answer. I called and I called, but every time I opened my mouth now, the seawater washed in. I had to give her up. I had to save myself if I could. There was little point in wasting energy by trying to swim. After all, I had nowhere to swim to. Instead, I would simply float. I would cling to my football, tread water gently, and wait for the Peggy Sue to come back. Sooner or later, they had to discover I was on board. Sooner or later, they would come looking for me. I mustn't kick too much, just enough to keep my chin above water, no more. Too much movement would attract the sharks. Morning must come soon. I had to hang on till then. I had to. The water wasn't that cold. I had my football. I had a chance. I kept telling myself that over and over again. But the world stayed stubbornly black about me, and I could feel the water slowly chilling me to death. I tried singing to stop myself from shivering, to take my mind off the sharks. I sang every song I could remember, but after a while, I'd forget the words. Always I came back to the only song I was sure I could finish. 10 green bottles. I sang it out loud again and again. It reassured me to hear the sound of my own voice. It made me feel less alone in the sea. And I always looked for the grey glint of dawn, but it would not come. And it would not come. Eventually, I fell silent, and my legs just would not kick anymore. I clung to my football. My head drifted into sleep. I knew I mustn't, but I couldn't help myself. My hands kept slipping off the ball. I was fast losing the last of my strength. I would go down to the bottom of the sea and lie in my grave among the seaweed and the sailors' bones and shipwrecks. The strange thing was that I didn't really mind. I didn't care. Not anymore. I floated away into sleep, into my dreams. And in my dream, I saw a boat gliding towards me, silent over the sea. The Peggy Sue. Dear, dear Peggy Sue. They'd come back for me. I knew they would. Strong arms grabbed me. I was hauled upward and out of the water. I lay there on the deck, gasping for air like a landed fish. Someone was bending over me, shaking me, talking to me. I couldn't understand a word that was being said, but it didn't matter. I felt Stella's hot breath on my face, her tongue licking my ear. She was safe. I was safe. All was well. So, all seems to be well so far. And and we're only on chapter 4, so what on earth could possibly be happening in the rest of this book? Let's see. I was woken by a howling, like the howling of a gale through the masts. I looked about me. There were no masts above me. There were no sails. No movement under me either. No breath of wind. Seratois was barking, but some way off. I was not on a boat at all, but lying stretched out on sand. The howling became a screaming, a fearful crescendo of screeching that died away in its own echoes. I sat up. I was on a beach, a broad white sweep of sand with trees growing thick and lush behind me right down to the beach. Then I saw Stella prancing about in the shallows. I called her and she came bounding out of the sea to greet me, her tail circling wildly. When all the leaping and licking and hugging were done, I struggled to my feet. I was weak all over. I looked about me. The wide blue sea was as empty as the cloudless sky above. No Peggy Sue. No boat. No nothing. No one. I called again and again for my mother and my father. I called until the tears came and I could call no more, until I knew there was no point. I stood there for some time trying to work out how I had got there, how it was I had survived. I had such confused memories of being picked up, of being on board the Peggy Sue, but I knew now I couldn't have been. I must have dreamed it, dreamed the whole thing. I must have clung to my football and kept myself afloat until I was washed up. I thought of my football then, but it was nowhere to be seen. So he lost his football, found his football, lost his football again. Stella, of course, was unconcerned about all the whys and wherefores. She kept bringing me sticks to throw and would go galloping after them into the sea without a care in the world. Then came the howling from the trees and the hackles went up on Stella's neck. She charged up the beach, barking and barking until she was sure she had silenced the last of the echoes. It was a musical, plaintive howling this time, not at all menacing. I thought I recognised it. I had heard howling like it once before on a visit to London Zoo. Gibbons. Funky gibbons, my father had called them. I still don't know why to this day, but I loved the sound of the word funky. Perhaps that's why I remembered what they were. It's only gibbons, I told Stella. Just funky gibbons. They won't hurt us. But I couldn't be at all sure I was right. From where I now stood, I could see that the forest grew more sparsely at the side of a great hill some way inland, and it occurred to me then that if I could reach the bare rocky outcrop at the summit, I would be able to see further out to sea. Or perhaps there'd be some house or farm further inland, or maybe a road and I could find someone to help. But if I left the beach and they came back looking for me, what then? I decided I would have to take a chance. I set off at a run, Seratois at my heels, and I soon found myself in the cooling shade of the forest. I discovered a narrow track going uphill in the right direction, I thought. So I followed it, only slowing to a walk when the hill became too steep. The forest was alive with creatures. Birds cackled and screeched high above me, and always the howling wailed and wafted through the trees, but more distantly now. It wasn't the sounds of the forest that bothered me, though. It was the eyes. I felt as if I was being watched by 1,000 inquisitive eyes. I think Stella did too, for she had been strangely quiet ever since we entered the forest, constantly glancing up at me for reassurance and comfort. I did my best to give it, but she could sense that I too was frightened. What had seemed at first to be a short hike now felt more like a great expedition into the interior. We emerged exhausted from the trees, clambered laboriously up a rocky scree and stood at long last on the peak. The sun was blazing down. I had not really felt the burning heat of it until then. I scanned the horizon. If there was a sail somewhere out there in the haze, I could not see it. And then it came to me that even if I were to see a sail, what could I do? I couldn't light a fire. I had no matches. I knew about cavemen rubbing sticks together, but I had never tried it. I looked all round me now. Sea sea. Sea. Nothing but sea on all sides. I was on an island. I was alone. The island looked perhaps 2 or 3 miles in length, no more. It was shaped a bit like an elongated peanut, but longer at one end than the other. There was a long swathe of brilliant white beach on both sides of the island, and at the far end another hill, the slope steeper and more thickly wooded, but not so high as mine. With the exception of these twin peaks, the entire island seemed to be covered with forest. So far as I could see, there was no sign of human life. Even then, as I stood there that first morning, filled with apprehension at the terrifying implications of my dreadful situation, I remember thinking how wonderful it was. A green jewel of an island framed in white, the sea all about it a silken shimmering blue. Strangely, perhaps comforted somehow by the extraordinary beauty of the place, I was not at all downhearted. On the contrary, I felt strangely elated. I was alive. Seratois was alive. We had survived. I sat down in the shadow of a great rock. The gibbons set up a renewed chorus of howling and hooting in the forest, and a flock of raucous birds clattered up out the canopy of the trees below us and flew across the island to settle on the trees on the hillside opposite. We'll be all right, I told Stella. Mum and Dad, they'll come back for us. They're bound to. They will. They will. Mum will get better and they'll come back for us. She won't leave us here. She'll find us. You'll see. All we've got to do is keep a lookout for them and stay alive. Water. We'll need water. But so do those monkeys, right? We've just got to find it, that's all. And there must be food here too. Fruit or nuts, something. Whatever it is they eat, we'll eat. It helped to speak my thoughts out loud to Stella. Helped to calm the panic that came over me now in waves. More than anything, it was Stella's companionship that helped me through those first hours on the island. It seemed to make sense not to plunge at once into the forest looking for water. To be honest, I was too frightened anyway, but rather to explore the shoreline first. I might come across a stream or river flowing out into the sea, and with a bit of luck, on the way, I might well find something I could eat as well. I set off in good spirits, leaping down the scree like a mountain goat. Where monkeys lived, I reasoned, we could live. I kept telling myself that. I soon discovered that the track down through the trees was bereft of all edible vegetation. I did see fruit of sorts, what looked like fruit to me anyway. There were coconuts up there too, but the trees were all impossible to climb. Some rose 100 feet, some 200 feet from the forest floor. I'd never seen such giant trees. At least the intertwining canopy did provide welcome relief from the heat of the day. All the same, I was becoming desperately parched now, and so was Stella. She padded alongside me all the way, her tongue hanging. She kept giving baleful looks whenever our eyes met. There was no comfort I could give her. We found our beach once again and set off round the island, keeping whenever possible to the edge of the forest to the shade. Still, we found no stream. Again, I saw plenty of fruit, but always too high, and the trees were always too smooth, too sheer to climb. I found plenty of coconuts on the ground, but always cracked open and empty inside. When the beach petered out, we had to strike off into the forest itself. Here too, I found a narrow track to follow. The forest became impenetrable at this point, dark and menacing. There was no howling anymore, but something infinitely more sinister. The shiver of leaves, the cracking of twigs, sudden surreptitious rustlings, and they were near me, all around me. I was quite sure now, that eyes were watching us. We were being followed. I hurried on, swallowing my fear as best I could. I thought of the gibbons I'd seen back in the zoo and tried to persuade myself how harmless they had looked. They'd leave us alone. They'd never attack us. They weren't man-eaters. But as the rustlings came ever closer, ever more threatening, I found it harder and harder to convince myself. I began to run. I kept running until the track brought us out into the rocks, into the blessed light of day. And there was the sea again. The end of the island appeared to be littered with massive boulders that lay like tumbled cliffs all along the coast. We leaped from one to the other, and all the while I kept a keen eye out for the trickle of a stream coming down through the rocks from the forest above, but I found none. I was exhausted by now. I sat down to rest, my mouth dry, my head throbbing. I was racked with desperate thoughts. I would die of thirst. I would be torn from limb to limb by the monkeys. Stella's eyes looked up into mine. There's got to be water, I told her. There's got to be. So, said her eyes, what are you doing sitting here feeling sorry for yourself? I forced myself to my feet and went on. The seawater in the rock pools was so cool, so tempting. I tasted it, but it was salty and brackish. I spat it out at once. You went mad if you drank it. I knew that much. I think I'm going to stop there because there's still quite a few pages left of this chapter. And it looks like chapter 5 is a bit shorter. So I will combine chapter 4 and 5, the rest of chapter 4 and chapter 5 tomorrow. The work that's linked to chapter 4 for today, I've already read the sections of the text that go with it. If you want to finish reading chapter 4, it will be available on the website, or come back and listen to the rest tomorrow. Okay, see you tomorrow, Year 6. Bye.